Environmental externalities represent the unintended spillover effects that arise when economic activities impose costs or benefits on individuals, communities, or ecosystems that are not reflected in market transactions. These effects often emerge subtly at first, but their cumulative impact can be profound, influencing the quality of natural environments and the health and well-being of societies. When examining environmental externalities, it becomes clear that the activities generating them may appear harmless or economically beneficial in the short term, yet they create long-term consequences that extend far beyond the immediate sphere of production and consumption. A useful way to understand these dynamics is to consider how daily actions, industrial processes, transportation systems, and agricultural practices interact with natural systems. Every economic sector generates some form of environmental footprint, and in many cases, this footprint is not fully accounted for in the prices consumers pay. As a result, the burden is shifted toward the broader public, future generations, and the environment itself. This disconnect between private gain and public cost lies at the core of environmental externalities. The interplay between these external impacts and natural ecosystems is multifaceted. Air and water systems absorb vast quantities of pollutants, often beyond their natural capacity to filter and degrade them. Climate systems react to the accumulation of greenhouse gases, altering global temperature balances. Biodiversity declines when habitats degrade or fragment due to unsustainable land use. These processes are interconnected, meaning that degradation in one domain frequently amplifies pressures in others. Recognizing the significance of externalities provides a foundation for understanding why environmental policy, regulation, and economic instruments play such a crucial role in modern governance. Without mechanisms to internalize external costs, such as pollution taxes, emission standards, or incentives for cleaner technologies, market outcomes remain incomplete and socially inefficient. This topic sets the stage for exploring four of the most visible areas where environmental externalities manifest: air pollution, water pollution, climate change, and ecological degradation. Each domain offers concrete examples of how human activity reshapes natural systems. The examination of these areas not only highlights the complexity of environmental challenges, but also reinforces the need for collective awareness and action. Through this lens, environmental externalities are not abstract concepts, but practical realities that shape the quality of life, influence economic development, and determine the resilience of ecosystems worldwide. Air pollution arises from a diverse combination of human activities that release harmful substances into the atmosphere. These pollutants originate from sources that reflect the ways modern societies function: transportation networks, expanding industries, construction activities, waste disposal practices, and energy production systems. Urban and industrial regions concentrate these emissions most intensely, creating a mix of gases and particulate matter that interact chemically and physically as they disperse. Transportation remains one of the most prominent contributors. Vehicles powered by internal combustion engines emit nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, unburnt hydrocarbons, and fine particulates. In many regions, older vehicles with outdated engines produce disproportionately high emissions, especially when traffic congestion limits optimal combustion conditions. The emissions produced in these areas can travel long distances depending on meteorological patterns. extending their effects far beyond the cityscape. Industrial operations add another layer to this complex web. High-temperature processes release a variety of pollutants through smokestacks, including carbon dioxide from fuel combustion, sulfur dioxide from sulfur-containing materials, and nitrogen oxides formed during intense heat. These emissions often serve as precursors to secondary pollutants, including ozone and aerosols, which further deteriorate air quality. In addition, industries engaged in chemical processing or heavy manufacturing may release hazardous organic compounds and trace metals, posing risks to both ecological and human health. Construction activities exacerbate particulate levels, dispersing dust generated by excavation, demolition, and material handling. Such dust can contain silica, heavy metals, and other harmful particles that accumulate in the air. Rapidly urbanizing areas tend to experience heightened exposure as continuous construction fuels economic development while simultaneously degrading environmental quality. Waste burning, particularly in regions without adequate municipal systems, introduces toxic organic compounds such as dioxins and furans into the atmosphere. When combined with particulate emissions from open combustion, these pollutants create persistent environmental and health concerns. Energy production from fossil fuels plays a central role as well. Thermal power stations emit greenhouse gases along with sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and mercury. These emissions underscore the intricate relationship between energy demand, economic development, and environmental quality. Altogether, air pollution reflects a system with many inputs and far-reaching consequences. Its complexity lies not only in the diversity of sources, but also in the interactions among pollutants once released. Understanding this complexity helps frame the need for comprehensive environmental monitoring, coordinated policy measures, and technological innovations capable of reducing emissions at their origin. The principal sources of air pollution arise from activities that are deeply embedded in daily economic and social life. Transportation, industrial processes, construction activities, and waste combustion each play a distinctive role in shaping air quality, and their combined effects determine the pollutant mix that urban and rural populations experience. Transportation remains one of the most visible sources. Vehicles powered by diesel and gasoline engines emit nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, and volatile organic compounds. These pollutants accumulate particularly in urban corridors with dense traffic and limited air circulation. In many regions, older or poorly maintained vehicles contribute disproportionately, and traffic congestion intensifies emissions by extending combustion times and reducing fuel efficiency. Industrial processes represent another significant category. Large-scale facilities engaged in energy production, metalworking, chemical manufacturing, and other high-temperature operations release contaminants directly into the atmosphere. Fuel combustion in industrial boilers emits carbon dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and sulfur dioxide, while incomplete combustion produces soot. Industries that handle organic solvents or specialized chemicals can introduce additional pollutants with toxicological significance. Construction activities generate substantial particulate pollution. Dust from excavation, demolition, concrete cutting, and material transport elevates PM10 levels. Such particles can remain airborne for extended periods, infiltrate indoor spaces, and contribute to respiratory irritation or long-term health effects. In areas undergoing rapid development, construction-related pollution can become a chronic issue affecting workers and residents alike. Waste combustion adds further complexity. In many regions, open burning of mixed refuse persists due to inadequate waste collection or disposal infrastructure. This practice releases particulates, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and a range of toxic organic compounds. When plastics or treated materials are burned, emissions may include persistent pollutants with long-lasting environmental impacts. By examining these sources collectively, a clearer understanding emerges of why air pollution persists despite technological progress and regulatory efforts. Each sector contributes uniquely, yet all intersect in shaping atmospheric conditions. Addressing air pollution effectively thus requires coordinated strategies that target both emission reduction and improved management practices across multiple sectors. Air pollution imposes a wide array of health burdens that affect populations across all age groups. Exposure to pollutants such as PM 2.5, PM 10, ozone, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen oxides has been linked to acute and chronic conditions affecting the respiratory, cardiovascular, and nervous systems. These pollutants penetrate the body through inhalation, where their size and chemical composition determine how deeply they travel and the types of damage they cause. Fine particulate matter is particularly harmful due to its ability to reach the deepest parts of the lungs. Once lodged in the alveolar spaces, these particles provoke inflammatory responses that reduce the efficiency of gas exchange. Chronic exposure can lead to the development of long-term respiratory conditions, including chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, asthma, and reduced lung function. Children and older adults are especially vulnerable, as their respiratory systems may be more sensitive to environmental stressors. Air pollution also contributes significantly to cardiovascular diseases. Pollutants entering the bloodstream can trigger systemic inflammation, oxidative stress, and changes in heart rhythm. These mechanisms help explain the link between air pollution and stroke, ischemic heart disease, hypertension, and arrhythmias. Epidemiological studies have shown that approximately 1/4 of global deaths are associated with factors linked to air quality degradation, underscoring the severity of the issue. In addition to respiratory and cardiovascular impacts, long-term exposure to polluted air is associated with increased risks of neurological disorders, including cognitive decline. Pollutants may cross the blood-brain barrier or trigger systemic inflammation that affects neural function. The burden is not only personal, but also societal. Communities exposed to poor air quality often face higher healthcare costs, reduced productivity, and elevated rates of absenteeism. These health impacts demonstrate that air pollution is not merely an environmental concern, but a multidimensional public health challenge requiring comprehensive mitigation efforts. The economic implications of air pollution extend well beyond measurable healthcare expenses, reaching into multiple layers of societal and institutional functioning. While medical treatment costs represent a significant portion of the documented burden, they capture only a fraction of the true economic impact. Air pollution influences labor markets, productivity, governmental budgets, and even long-term national economic performance. Its effects accumulate steadily, often without being fully accounted for in traditional economic indicators. Quantitative assessments show that mortality impacts alone can represent up to 2/3 of the total external costs generated by fossil fuel-based electricity production. These findings highlight how the premature loss of life, reduced quality of life, and long-term disabilities impose substantial financial liabilities on economies. Methods used to estimate these costs often rely on willingness to pay models and healthcare valuation techniques designed to quantify the economic value of avoided health risks. Such models consistently demonstrate that the cost of inaction far exceeds the cost of mitigation. The transport sector provides another clear example of how externalities accumulate. Urban road networks experience congestion, noise, and emissions that impose significant burdens on surrounding populations. Marginal external costs for road transport frequently exceed the tax levels imposed on fuel in many European regions. As a result, taxpayers and national health systems end up subsidizing the true cost of transportation indirectly, underscoring a misalignment between market prices and societal costs. Depending on the fuel type and regulatory context, internalization rates may vary dramatically, ranging from minimal coverage of external costs to partial compensation through taxation. Beyond direct financial burdens, air pollution affects social stability and public confidence in governmental institutions. Households face increasing economic pressure when managing medical bills, workplace absences, and reduced earning potential. Businesses experience declines in workforce productivity due to illness-related interruptions. Even educational systems feel the impact when students face increased absenteeism or long-term developmental conditions stemming from poor air quality. Administrative systems may also face rising costs. Public agencies responsible for environmental monitoring, healthcare funding, social security, and infrastructure maintenance must allocate resources to deal with pollution-related challenges. This creates a feedback loop in which air pollution not only exacerbates existing socioeconomic disparities, but also strains the capacity of institutions to deliver essential services. Taken together, these economic factors reveal that air pollution is not solely an environmental issue, but a pervasive economic challenge with far-reaching consequences. The true cost extends into productivity losses, diminished well-being, weakened labor markets, and heightened pressure on public finances. Recognizing the full economic scale of air pollution reinforces the urgency of adopting policies that internalize external costs and promote cleaner, more sustainable development pathways. Air pollution affects ecosystems through a series of interconnected mechanisms that extend far beyond the original emission sources. One of the most well-known outcomes is acid deposition, commonly referred to as acid rain. This phenomenon occurs when sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides released into the atmosphere undergo chemical transformations, producing sulfuric and nitric acids. These acids eventually return to the Earth's surface through precipitation or as dry deposition, penetrating soils, vegetation, and aquatic environments. The consequences of acid deposition are both chemical and biological. As acidic inputs infiltrate soils, they leach essential nutrients such as calcium, magnesium, and potassium, reducing soil fertility. At the same time, acidified soils mobilize aluminum into bioavailable forms that inhibit plant root development and nutrient uptake. This combination elevates stress levels in terrestrial vegetation, weakening forests and reducing their resilience to pests, diseases, and extreme weather events. Over time, compromised forests lose their capacity to sequester carbon efficiently, contributing indirectly to climate change. In freshwater systems, Acidification alters water chemistry in ways that threaten aquatic species. Lower pH levels narrow the tolerance ranges of fish, amphibians, and invertebrates, disrupting reproductive cycles and inducing population declines. Species sensitive to pH fluctuations may disappear entirely from acidified lakes and streams, leading to cascading ecological effects that reshape entire food webs. Reduced biodiversity and shifts in species composition weaken the overall stability of aquatic ecosystems. Beyond acid rain, air pollution triggers other ecological disruptions. Ground-level ozone, formed through the reaction of nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds under sunlight, impairs photosynthesis and damages leaf tissues. These effects reduce plant productivity and can affect crop yields in agricultural regions. Toxic metals and persistent pollutants transported through the atmosphere accumulate in soils and sediments, where they may remain for decades, entering the food chain through plants and aquatic organisms. Ecosystems operate through delicate balances of nutrient cycling, species interactions, and energy flows. Air pollution disrupts these balances, creating conditions that weaken resilience and alter fundamental ecological processes. Understanding these impacts emphasizes the need to address pollution not only as an environmental health issue, but also as a threat to long-term ecosystem stability and productivity. In this broader context, air pollution undermines the natural systems that support agriculture, forestry, water resources, and biodiversity, illustrating the far-reaching consequences of unmanaged emissions. Water pollution is shaped by many sources, but agricultural activity stands out as one of the most significant contributors, largely due to nutrient runoff from fertilizers and manure. Modern agriculture relies heavily on nitrogen and phosphorus inputs to maintain high crop yields. However, these nutrients do not remain confined to cultivated fields. Rainfall irrigation and surface runoff transport them into rivers, lakes, and coastal zones, initiating a process known as eutrophication. Eutrophication accelerates the growth of algae in freshwater and marine environments. At first, algal blooms may appear to enhance biological activity, but as they proliferate, they disrupt dissolved oxygen levels. When algae die and decompose, microbial activity intensifies, consuming oxygen and creating hypoxic or anoxic conditions. These oxygen-depleted waters cannot support fish or many forms of aquatic life, leading to habitat loss and population declines. In extreme cases, persistent nutrient loading creates dead zones incapable of sustaining complex ecosystems. Agricultural landscapes in tropical regions face amplified risks due to naturally low soil nutrient availability. To maintain productivity, intensive fertilizer application becomes common, increasing the likelihood of nutrient leaching into groundwater. These nutrients can migrate over long distances, sometimes affecting communities and ecosystems far removed from agricultural fields. Pesticides applied to control weeds, insects, and fungal diseases add another layer of concern. Many pesticides are designed to be biologically active, meaning they can harm non-target organisms when transported through runoff. Once in waterways, pesticides may persist, accumulate in sediments, and affect aquatic species through chronic exposure. Such contamination also raises concerns for human health when water sources used for drinking or recreation become affected. The dominance of agriculture in water pollution highlights the complex tension between food production and environmental protection. As global food demand grows, agricultural intensification becomes more prevalent, increasing the risk of nutrient and chemical pollution. However, this challenge also presents opportunities for implementing better management practices such as buffer zones, precision agriculture, controlled fertilizer application, and improved soil conservation. Addressing agricultural impacts is essential to restoring water quality and protecting the long-term health of aquatic ecosystems. Water contamination emerges from multiple pathways, each linked to human activities that introduce pollutants into freshwater systems. These pathways differ in origin and impact, yet together they create persistent challenges for maintaining clean and safe water resources. Agricultural runoff represents one of the most widespread pathways. Fertilizers, pesticides, and livestock waste enter freshwater systems through surface flow and groundwater movement. Nitrogen and phosphorus stimulate algal blooms, while bacterial pathogens originating from animal waste can compromise the safety of drinking water. The scale of this problem increases during heavy rainfall events, when large volumes of contaminated runoff rapidly enter rivers and lakes. Urban stormwater contributes another major route of contamination. Cities contain large expanses of impervious surfaces, roads, sidewalks, roofs, that prevent water from infiltrating into the ground. During rainfall, storm water washes over these surfaces, carrying hydrocarbons from vehicles, heavy metals from industrial residues, microplastics from degraded materials, and other pollutants. This mixture flows directly into waterways, often without filtration, intensifying contamination in downstream ecosystems. Industrial discharge remains a significant concern, despite regulatory frameworks. Manufacturing facilities may release heavy metals, organic solvents, thermal effluents, and persistent pollutants into water systems. Even when regulated, accidental releases, outdated infrastructure, or insufficient enforcement can result in substantial contamination events. These pollutants can accumulate in sediments where they may remain for decades and pose risks to aquatic organisms and human health. Inadequate sewage systems amplify the problem, particularly in rapidly urbanizing regions. Untreated or partially treated domestic wastewater introduces high biological oxygen demand loads, along with pathogens that threaten both ecological and public health. In many areas, outdated sewage networks cannot accommodate growing populations, leading to frequent overflows during storms. Understanding these four pathways, agricultural runoff, urban stormwater, industrial discharge, and insufficient sewage treatment, provides a comprehensive view of how water contamination persists. Because these pathways are interconnected and often influenced by climatic conditions, solutions require coordinated planning and long-term investment. Strengthening infrastructure, enforcing environmental regulations, and promoting sustainable land management are essential steps toward restoring healthy water systems. Aquatic ecosystems face mounting pressures as pollutants enter water bodies through interconnected mechanisms that alter physical, chemical, and biological conditions. These systems, which include rivers, lakes, wetlands, and coastal zones, rely on balanced interactions among species and stable nutrient cycles. When pollutants disturb these balances, ecosystem health declines rapidly, often producing irreversible consequences. One of the fundamental drivers of ecological disruption is the accumulation of organic matter from agricultural and urban runoff. When this organic material enters water bodies, microbial decomposition begins. This process consumes dissolved oxygen as bacteria break down the material. If biochemical oxygen demand exceeds oxygen replenishment from photosynthesis or atmospheric exchange, hypoxic or anoxic zones form. Such low oxygen environments cannot support fish, shellfish, or many invertebrates, leading to mass mortality events and long-term habitat loss. Nutrient-rich runoff from agriculture accelerates eutrophication. Elevated nitrogen and phosphorus concentrations stimulate dense phytoplankton blooms that block sunlight from reaching aquatic vegetation. When these blooms collapse, they create massive pulses of decaying biomass that further deplete oxygen levels. Some blooms consist of cyanobacteria capable of producing potent toxins harmful to fish, birds, domestic animals, and humans. These toxins can contaminate drinking water sources and pose significant public health risks. Beyond eutrophication, aquatic ecosystems suffer from sedimentation, chemical contamination, and temperature changes associated with human activities. Heavy metals and persistent pollutants accumulate in sediments, where they may enter the food chain through bottom-feeding species. Over time, these contaminants biomagnify, reaching higher trophic levels and posing risk to predators, including humans. Thermal pollution from industrial processes alters habitat suitability for temperature-sensitive species, contributing to shifts in biodiversity composition. The combined impact of these pressures weakens ecosystem resilience. Once ecological thresholds are crossed, recovery may take decades or may be impossible without substantial human intervention. Protecting aquatic ecosystems requires reducing pollutant inputs, restoring degraded habitats, and monitoring biological indicators that signal ecosystem stress. Ensuring healthy water systems is essential for maintaining biodiversity, fisheries, recreation, and the long-term sustainability of freshwater and marine resources. Climate change emerges from alterations to Earth's atmospheric radiation balance, primarily driven by human activities. The accumulation of long-lived greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor, intensifies the greenhouse effect by trapping infrared radiation that would otherwise escape into space. This process warms the planet, triggering a cascade of environmental, economic, and social impacts. Carbon dioxide remains the most influential greenhouse gas due to its abundance and long atmospheric, lifetime fossil fuel combustion for transport, electricity generation, industrial processes, and heating constitutes its main source. As global energy demand continues to rise, emissions follow suit unless offset by cleaner technologies or policy interventions. Land use changes also play a substantial role. Deforestation reduces the biosphere's ability to absorb CO2, while soil disturbance releases additional carbon stored in organic matter. Methane contributes significantly despite its lower atmospheric concentration compared to CO2. Its global warming potential is much higher, particularly over shorter timeframes. Agricultural activities are a major source. Enteric fermentation in ruminants releases methane, and rice paddies emit large quantities due to anaerobic decomposition in flooded soils. Fossil fuel extraction and transportation add further methane emissions through leaks and venting. Waste decomposition in landfills under oxygen. Poor conditions also contribute sizable amounts. Water vapor, although naturally occurring, amplifies warming through feedback loops. As global temperatures increase, evaporation intensifies, enhancing atmospheric moisture and strengthening the greenhouse effect. The accumulation of these gases disrupts climate systems, leading to rising global temperatures, melting ice caps, shifting precipitation patterns, and increased frequency of extreme weather events. Ecosystems struggle to adapt to rapid climatic shifts, and socio-economic systems become increasingly vulnerable. Food production, water availability, human health, and coastal infrastructure all face growing pressures as climate patterns deviate from historical norms. The greenhouse gas challenge underscores the need for mitigation strategies, including emissions reduction, renewable energy adoption, sustainable land management, and technological innovation. Addressing climate change requires long-term commitment and global coordination, as its impacts transcend geographic and political boundaries. Understanding the role of greenhouse gases provides the foundation for developing solutions capable of preserving environmental stability and supporting sustainable development in the decades ahead. Climate change generates a chain reaction of environmental effects that spread throughout natural systems in interconnected and sometimes unpredictable ways. These impacts rarely occur in isolation. Instead, they interact through feedback loops that amplify their severity. Understanding these cascading relationships helps illustrate why climate change represents not just a single environmental issue, but a systemic transformation affecting ecological, social, and economic structures simultaneously. One of the most recognized consequences is the rise in global temperatures. Even small increases in average temperature can shift plant metabolic rates, affect the timing of seasonal events, and disrupt species interactions. Flowering periods and pollinator emergence may become decoupled, reducing reproductive success in plants and undermining food resources that rely on stable ecological rhythms. These changes propagate through food webs, altering the dynamics of entire ecosystems. Changes in precipitation patterns further complicate natural processes. Altered rainfall distribution, whether through intensified storms, prolonged droughts, or erratic seasonal shifts, creates imbalances in watershed hydrology, increased evaporation rates in warmer climates, reduce soil moisture and deplete surface waters, stressing vegetation and increasing competition for water resources. At the same time, heavier rainfall events contribute to flooding, soil erosion, and nutrient washout, all of which disrupt terrestrial and aquatic habitats. Rising sea levels add another dimension to the cascading effects. As cryospheric reserves melt, coastal ecosystems face submersion, erosion, and the loss of natural defense mechanisms such as dunes, wetlands, and mangrove forests. These ecosystems provide essential services, including storm surge protection, habitat provision, and carbon storage. As they degrade or disappear, human settlements, infrastructure, and terrestrial species become increasingly vulnerable to climate-related hazards. Fire regimes are also undergoing transformation. Higher temperatures and prolonged periods of drought increase wildfire frequency, intensity, and size. These fires not only destroy vegetation, but also convert landscapes into new ecological states that store and release carbon differently. As fires burn hotter and spread faster, they emit large quantities of greenhouse gases, reinforcing the warming trend and creating a feedback cycle that accelerates environmental change. Ocean acidification emerges as another consequence of climate forcing. As carbon dioxide dissolves into seawater, it lowers pH levels and interferes with the ability of calcifying organisms, such as corals, shellfish, and some plankton, to build their skeletons or shells. These disruptions ripple through marine food webs, affecting species survival, community structure, and fisheries that millions of people depend on. Taken together, these interconnected impacts show how climate change reshapes natural systems through complex multi-layered pathways. Each environmental shift amplifies others, illustrating why addressing climate change requires comprehensive strategies that acknowledge its systemic nature. Climate change not only transforms natural environments, but also reshapes the socio-economic systems that depend on stable ecological conditions. These disruptions influence agriculture, infrastructure, energy demand, supply chains, and human settlements. As climate patterns become increasingly variable, the economic and social consequences grow more intense, affecting both local communities and global markets. Agriculture is among the most exposed sectors. Changing precipitation regimes alter planting schedules, affect germination, and create uncertainty in crop management. Heightened temperature variability reduces yields in temperature-sensitive crops, while heat stress impairs pollination, increasing the risk of crop failures. In regions experiencing prolonged drought, farmers face the high financial costs of supplemental irrigation or the difficult decision to abandon fields. These pressures intensify food insecurity and elevate market volatility, especially in regions dependent on climate-sensitive crops. Extreme weather events compound these challenges. Floods, droughts, and heat waves disrupt harvesting schedules, damage equipment, and erode fertile soils. These hazards can wipe out entire seasons of agricultural production, creating economic hardship for households and reducing national output in the agricultural sector. Climate change also imposes growing strain on infrastructure. Roads, bridges, and energy grids require constant maintenance, yet increasingly severe weather accelerates deterioration. Sea level rise threatens coastal transport hubs, industrial zones, and housing stock. Flooding damages manufacturing facilities, forcing temporary or permanent shutdowns and leading to lost operational days. Heat extremes affect thermal power plant efficiency, increasing cooling requirements and tightening supply-demand margins in urban power grids. Beyond physical infrastructure, climate-linked disruptions affect labor productivity. Outdoor workers experience reduced safe working hours under extreme heat, diminishing productivity and increasing health risks. Urban areas face heightened energy costs as demand for cooling rises, burdening households and businesses alike. These socioeconomic pressures widen inequality as vulnerable communities are disproportionately impacted by environmental hazards. Financially constrained households struggle to rebuild after climate-related disasters or invest in adaptive measures such as improved housing, irrigation technologies, or insurance coverage. As these conditions compound, climate change contributes not only to economic strain, but also to social instability, migration pressures, and long-term developmental challenges. Ultimately, the socioeconomic consequences of climate change highlight the need for integrated adaptation strategies, ranging from resilient infrastructure planning to climate-smart agriculture and strengthened social support systems. Without coordinated action, climate-related disruptions will continue to challenge economic stability and community well-being across diverse regions. Biodiversity loss results from a combination of interacting drivers that reshape ecosystems and reduce the abundance, diversity, and resilience of species. These drivers operate at multiple scales and often reinforce one another, making biodiversity decline one of the most complex and urgent environmental challenges of the modern era. Land use change remains a central factor. The conversion of forests, wetlands, and natural habitats into agricultural fields, urban areas, and industrial zones fragments landscapes and reduces habitat availability. Fragmentation isolates populations, limits genetic exchange, and diminishes ecosystem connectivity. Simplified landscapes cannot support the same diversity of species as complex natural environments, and once habitats are altered, recovery becomes increasingly difficult. Pollution contributes significantly to biodiversity decline. Nutrient runoff, pesticides, heavy metals, and industrial effluents enter terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, altering community structures and reducing survivability for sensitive species. Agricultural pollutants, in particular, trigger cascading downstream effects that modify food webs, disrupt reproductive cycles, and diminish ecosystem stability. Overexploitation adds another layer to biodiversity pressure. Fisheries, forestry, and wildlife harvesting practices often exceed reproductive or regeneration capacities, leading to declining populations and altered ecological structures. Unsustainable extraction can remove keystone species, those that play a disproportionately important role in maintaining ecological balance, triggering cascading effects across entire ecosystems. Invasive species pose additional challenges. Human activities such as trade, travel, and transport facilitate the introduction of non-native species into new environments. These newcomers can outcompete native species, spread diseases, or act as aggressive predators, restructuring habitats and altering ecosystem functions. Once established, invasive species are often extremely difficult to control or eradicate. Climate change further accelerates biodiversity loss by shifting bioclimatic envelopes faster than many species can adapt or disperse. Changes in temperature, precipitation, and seasonal timing affect food availability, migration patterns, and reproductive success. Species already stressed by habitat loss or pollution become even more vulnerable under shifting climate conditions. The interplay of these drivers demonstrates that biodiversity loss is not caused by a single factor, but by an interconnected network of human and environmental influences. Protecting biodiversity requires holistic approaches that address land management, pollution control, sustainable resource use, and climate resilience simultaneously. Ecosystem collapse occurs when interconnected ecological processes degrade to the point where essential system functions can no longer be sustained. These functions include nutrient cycling, energy flow, habitat maintenance, and food web stability. As these processes break down, ecosystems lose their capacity to support biodiversity, regulate climate, and provide services that human societies rely upon. The early stages of collapse often begin with disruptions to primary production. Photosynthetic organisms, plants, algae, and phytoplankton, form the base of most food webs, converting solar energy into usable biological energy. When key primary producers decline due to pollution, climate shifts, habitat loss, or invasive species, the amount of energy entering the system is reduced. This change affects herbivores first, then predators, triggering cascading disruptions across trophic levels. Habitat degradation amplifies these effects. When structurally important plant species or foundational habitats such as coral reefs, wetlands, or grasslands degrade, the niches that support diverse communities disappear. Loss of keystone species, those whose presence maintains ecosystem balance, can accelerate collapse. Without these stabilizing organisms, energy pathways become unstable, population dynamics shift unpredictably, and ecological relationships weaken. Disruptions in nutrient cycling further undermine stability. Healthy ecosystems continuously recycle nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon, and other elements through biological, chemical, and physical processes. When species diversity declines, the organisms responsible for these cycles are lost or weakened, reducing the system's ability to maintain soil fertility, water quality, and biomass productivity. Imbalances in nutrient cycles can lead to algal blooms, soil infertility, or excessive carbon release, each contributing additional stress. As ecological functions degrade, ecosystems become more vulnerable to external pressures such as droughts, heat waves, storms, and pollution events. The reduced resilience increases the likelihood of crossing ecological thresholds beyond which recovery is slow or impossible. Once collapse occurs, ecosystems may transition into entirely different states, often less diverse, less productive, and less capable of supporting life. The concept of ecosystem function collapse underscores the importance of maintaining biodiversity, protecting foundational species, and preserving ecological interactions. Ensuring ecosystem resilience requires proactive conservation, restoration initiatives, and policies that reduce environmental pressures before critical thresholds are crossed. Addressing environmental externalities requires coordinated, multi-layered strategies that align technological progress, policy frameworks, economic instruments, and ecological restoration. Externalities arise when the true environmental costs of economic activities are not reflected in market prices, leading to overuse of resources and excessive pollution. Effective mitigation depends on shifting these hidden costs back into economic decision-making while promoting cleaner and more sustainable alternatives. Technological innovation plays a key role. Advances in renewable energy, energy efficiency, carbon capture, pollution control, and sustainable materials provide tools for reducing environmental pressures at their source. Technologies that demonstrate measurable emission reductions can reshape industrial processes and energy systems. Ensuring that these innovations are supported by stable investment frameworks and industry-level incentives helps accelerate their adoption. Economic instruments complement technological progress by realigning market incentives. Pigouvian taxes, designed to match prices with the marginal environmental damage of activities, encourage polluters to reduce emissions or adopt cleaner technologies. Fee-based schemes, emissions trading, and targeted subsidies reward low-impact practices while discouraging harmful ones. When structured effectively, economic tools internalize external costs and promote responsible resource use across sectors. Governance coordination ensures that mitigation strategies operate effectively across jurisdictions. Environmental challenges often span borders, requiring cooperation among national governments, regulatory agencies, and international organizations. Clear property rights over shared resources, harmonized regulations, and collaborative agreements enhance the capacity to manage pollution, conserve ecosystems, and enforce environmental commitments. Ecosystem-based solutions offer another pathway, harnessing natural processes to address environmental problems. Restoration projects can rebuild wetlands, forests, and coastal habitats that provide co-benefits such as carbon sequestration, biodiversity enhancement, and flood protection. Reintegrating natural systems into environmental management strengthens resilience and restores ecological functions that support long-term sustainability. By combining technological, economic, governance, and ecological approaches, societies can mitigate environmental externalities and move towards systems that balance economic development with environmental protection. These integrated strategies reflect a shift toward long-term thinking that recognizes the interdependence between human well-being and the health of natural systems.